Welcome. The HIPSTERS Diaries audio podcast. To transform a heart is to save a life. Let me introduce you to your soul. Come reason with me.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome back to HIPSTERS Diaries. You're here with Poetic Mi. If this is your first time joining me, welcome. And if you've been here since the beginning, welcome back. We're currently on chapter 6 of an 8-part journey called the Becoming series. 8 Sundays, 8 conversations, 8 opportunities to understand ourselves a little deeper. So we're going to reflect really quick. In chapter 1, we explored identity. In chapter 2, we explored love and attachment. In chapter 3, we explored trauma and survival mode. In chapter 4, we explored family and upbringing. In chapter 5, we explored purpose and pressure. But tonight, we're exploring isolation and loneliness, not because they're the same thing, but because many of us spend our lives confusing one for the other. And if we're being honest, some of the most important lessons we'll ever learn happens when things get quiet. Tonight, let's reason. I think everyone experiences loneliness at some point, but loneliness isn't always what we think. We might imagine loneliness as being physically alone. No friends, no family, nobody around. But some of the loneliest people in the world are surrounded by others, surrounded by conversations, surrounded by community, surrounded by attention, and still they feel unseen. Because loneliness isn't always about proximity. Sometimes it's about connection. Sometimes it's about feeling misunderstood. Sometimes it's about feeling like nobody truly sees what you're carrying. And that's why this conversation matters. But if we don't understand loneliness, we can spend years trying to fill a spiritual ache with human presence. The loneliest seasons of my life were the seasons where I was surrounded by the most people. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. There were seasons where I had friends, people around me, conversations, community, even praise, even recognition. And somehow I still felt lonely, because loneliness isn't always about who's around you. Sometimes it's about who understands you. Sometimes it's about whether you feel safe enough to fully be seen. For a long time, I didn't have the language for that. I just knew something felt missing. I knew I could be surrounded by people and still feel emotionally alone. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned when it's come to this is that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. Being alone is a choice. Loneliness was mental. Psychologists often describe loneliness as a perceived lack of meaningful connection. Notice the word perceived, because loneliness isn't measured by how many people are around you. It's measured by how connected you feel. You can spend an evening by yourself and feel completely at peace. And you can sit in a crowded room and feel completely disconnected. That's why loneliness can be so confusing, because from the outside, everything looks fine. But internally, something feels absent. Something feels unseen. Something feels disconnected. And for years, I thought the answer was more people, more friendships, more conversations, more community. But eventually, I realized that loneliness wasn't asking for more people. It was asking for something deeper. One of the hardest things to explain is what it feels like to receive connection and still feel empty, to receive praise and still feel empty, to receive support and still feel empty, to receive attention and still feel empty. Because eventually you start asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Why isn't this enough? But sometimes the answer isn't that something is wrong. Sometimes the answer is that you're searching for what cannot be filled by people alone. That realization changed everything for me, because what I thought was loneliness was actually the beginning of a deeper invitation. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that not every relationship is meant to go where you're going. Not because people are bad, not because there was hatred, not because there was conflict. Sometimes people simply belong to a different chapter. And honestly, that was difficult for me, because I've always loved deeply. I've always believed in people. I've always tried to hold on. But healing taught me that growth requires space. And sometimes space can only be created through separation. I remember a conversation I had with my friend Moses. He looked at me and said he could see where I was going. He also understood something I was still learning. I couldn't take everything with me. Not every relationship, not every habit, not every version of myself. And honestly, Jah wouldn't let me. At first, I thought things were being taken away from me. Now I understand that space was being made for me. Space for the life that Jah had prepared for me. Space for growth. Space for purpose. Space for a version of my life that I couldn't even imagine yet. I think one of the reasons people struggle with isolation is because isolation does two things at the same time. It hurts and it heals. That's the truth. Isolation can hurt because it forces us to sit with things rather than avoid it. The grief, the disappointment, the questions, the uncertainty, the loneliness, the parts of ourselves we've been running from. But isolation can also heal because eventually the noise gets quiet. And when the noise gets quiet, you can finally hear yourself. You can hear your thoughts. You can hear your fears. You can hear your desires, your truth. And maybe for the first time, you stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop distracting yourself. And you meet yourself honestly. One thing psychologists have discovered is that loneliness doesn't just affect our emotions. It affects how we see the world. When people experience prolonged loneliness, they often become more sensitive to rejection, more sensitive to disappointment, more likely to believe that they're unseen or unwanted or misunderstood. Not because those things are always true, but because loneliness changes your perception. And that's important to understand because sometimes the story we're telling ourselves isn't the whole story. Sometimes loneliness convinces us that nobody cares. And in reality, people may care deeply. They're just unable to meet us where we are. And understanding that helped me give people grace because not everybody is equipped to understand your journey. Not everybody is equipped to understand your calling. Not everybody is equipped to understand your healing. And that's okay. During my loneliest seasons, writing became a companion. Not because it fixed everything. Not because it removed the pain, but because it gave me language. Language for confusion, language for grief, language for growth, language for emotions I didn't fully understand. And looking back, I think that's one of the greatest gifts poetry ever gave me. It helped me understand myself. It helped me organize what felt chaotic. It helped me take feelings that felt too heavy to carry and place them somewhere safe. Because sometimes healing begins the moment we find language for what we're experiencing. And poetry gave me that language. For a long time, I thought silence meant something was missing. I thought silence meant abandonment. I thought silence meant loneliness. I thought silence meant absence. But eventually, I realized something. The silence wasn't empty. Something was happening there. Something was growing there. Something was being revealed there. And I wouldn't fully understand what that was until I got closer to Jah. The more I look back on my life, the more I realize that some relationships didn't end because I failed. Some relationships ended because Jah was making space. Space for growth. Space for healing. Space for purpose. Space for the life that he was preparing for me. And honestly, I didn't understand it at the time. Because when people leave or seasons end, our first instinct is to ask, why? What did I do wrong? Why couldn't I make this work? But sometimes the answer has nothing to do with failure. Sometimes you're simply growing. Sometimes you're entering a new season. Sometimes Jah is removing what no longer aligns with his will for your life. And that's difficult because we become attached to people, to versions of ourselves, to a familiar environment, but growth often requires release, and release is rarely comfortable. Something shifted in me when I stopped viewing solitude as punishment and started viewing it as preparation. Because solitude gave me something constant noise never could. Perspective, clarity, awareness, time to hear myself, time to hear Jah himself. Time to notice the work he was doing within me, the healing, the growth, the pruning, the transformation. And slowly, being alone stopped feeling like abandonment and started feeling like alignment. Not because I stopped loving people, not because I stopped valuing community, but because I finally understood that being by myself did not mean I was by myself. If loneliness taught me anything, it taught me Matthew 28:20. And surely I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. For years, I thought loneliness meant nobody was there. But looking back, Jah was there for me the entire time. In confusion, in heartbreak, in transitions, in uncertainty, in waiting, in loneliness, even when I couldn't see it, even when I couldn't feel it, even when I questioned it, he was there. And that's one of the greatest gifts loneliness ever gave me. It taught me that human presence and divine presence are not the same thing. And when people may leave, Jah remains. And if loneliness taught me Matthew 28:20, silence taught me Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Not strive, not perform, not force, not control. Be still. And honestly, that might be one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn. Because stillness requires trust. Stillness requires surrender. Stillness requires faith. And for a long time, I thought movement was progress. I thought doing more was the answer. I thought fixing everything was the answer. But silence taught me some answers can only be heard when the noise stops. Some healing can only happen when we become still. Some revelations only arrive when we stop running. If I had to summarize this chapter in one sentence, it would be this. The silence was never empty. It was teaching me. Teaching me who I was, teaching me what needed healing, teaching me what needed releasing, teaching me where Jah was leading me. Because some lessons can only be learned when the crowd gets quiet, when distractions fade, when applause disappears, when all that is left is you. And while those lessons can feel lonely, they are often the seasons that change us the most. To the younger me, the girl who felt alone, the girl who wondered why certain people left, the girl who questioned why some seasons felt so empty, to the girl who thought loneliness meant she was forgotten. I want you to know something. You are never abandoned. You are being prepared. You are never forgotten. You are being guided. You were never walking by yourself. Jah was with you the entire time. The friendships, the heartbreaks, the closed doors, the silent seasons, none of that was wasted. One day, you'll understand that some of the things that you cried over were making room for blessings you couldn't yet imagine. Trust the process. Trust the pruning. Trust Jah. Maybe loneliness isn't a sign that something is missing. Maybe sometimes it's an invitation. It's an invitation to slow down, an invitation to listen, an invitation to heal, an invitation to grow, an invitation to deepen your relationship with yourself and with Jah. Because sometimes the most important voice you'll ever hear is the one waiting on the other side of silence. Jah Rastafari family, thank you for reasoning with me. Thank you for growing with me. Thank you for choosing awareness over autopilot. This is HIPSTERS Diaries, where truth finds a soft place to land. Jah guide, Jah bless, Jah Rastafari.
Thank you for reasoning with me. Remember, to transform a heart is to save a life. Until next time, continue the journey inward. Love, peace, unity, and blessings. Jah Rastafari.